You think you can bully me off my own land? I spat, the words trembling, not with fear but with rage. You'll get nothing, not 1 inch of soil. I'll burn it before I sell it. Their smug faces, 3 men entailered, suits flickered, in the afternoon, light-like. Vultures circling a dying thing. They thought they could take everything my father built. That they could waive their offers, their threats, their lawyers, and I'd bow. But I didn't bow. I bought the land outright, every acre of it, for $10 million in cash. And then I gave it away, every last piece. The story didn't begin there, of course. It began with a letter. A plain, white envelope, tucked into the rusted mailbox at the end of our dirt driveway. I remember the wind that day, how it carried dust and the faint smell of cedar from the hills. I'd just come back from town, groceries in the truck bed, and when I pulled the letter out, I saw the name, *Eldon Holdings, Inc., * my stomach turned. I'd heard of them land developers, the kind who level forests, pave rivers, and name cul-de-sacs after the wildlife they destroyed. Inside, their words were sugar-coated poison. Dear Mr. Harrison, it began, we are writing with an offer to purchase your land for an amount well above market value. I didn't even finish reading. Première crumpledite de Androvos the hill. My father's old house sat there, the paint peeling, the porch sagging, the field stretching out golden in the late light. Every corner of that land was memory his laughter when we fixed the fence line. The way he'd point out where the deer crossed at dawn. It wasn't just land, it was him. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter spread open again, the words blurring under the lamplight. My neighbor, Ruth, knocked and came in, wiping her hands on her apron. You got one too, huh? She asked. I frowned. What do you mean? She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, the same logo, at the top. They're buying up everything along the ridge. Say they're putting in a residential development, luxury homes, golf course, the works. Her voice had that bitter edge only small town folks get when they know they're being erased. I felt something tighten in my chest. They're not taking this place. Not mine. Ruth sighed. They'll try. And they don't take no kindly. She was right. Over the next few weeks, the letters turned into phone calls. The calls turned into visits. Men in pressed shirts and shiny shoes started showing up at my gate, flashing smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Mr. Harrison, one of them said, his voice smooth like oil, we're offering you a deal that could change your life. 10 times what this land's worth. I already had my life changed once, I said, staring him down, when my father died. I'm not selling his grave. He gave me that practiced look of pity. We understand sentiment, but progress can't wait. You could start fresh anywhere, Florida, Montana, wherever you want. I want *here*. His smile faltered. You might regret that. That night, the first real shot was fired metaphorically, at least. A letter came from the county office, environmental code violations, outdated septic system, hazardous materials on site. Lies, every one of them. Eldon Holdings had friends in high places, and I was just a farmer with old boots and calloused hands. But they underestimated how deep roots can go. I started gathering papers, titles, tax records, even old photos of the land back when my father built the first barn. I drove to the county courthouse, hat in hand, and faced down a clerk who looked at me like I was wasting his time. Sir, I said, keeping my voice steady, I'm not letting them take what's mine. You tell whoever's behind those reports they'll need more than lies. The man didn't answer, just looked away. That told me enough. By the 3rd month, Eldon's offers had tripled. Their agents came back, this time with a man I recognized from the papers, Robert Eldon himself. The CEO, silver hair, sharp smile, the kind of man who'd charm your grandmother while buying the ground under her feet. He walked the field with me, pretending to admire the view. Beautiful, isn't it? He said. All this potential, just waiting to be realized. You've held on to it long enough. Potential's in the eye of the one who loves it, I said. He chuckled. Gai gomno. Everyone has a price. I turned to him, meeting his gaze square. No me. He stopped, smiling then. Be careful, Mr. Harrison. We can make this unpleasant. They did. Though it a week, somewhere no one saw who. Sheriff called it an accident. Insurance refused to pay out. Cows scattered that night, and I spent hours rounding them up by lantern light, the air thick with smoke and rage. That was when I decided. If they wanted my land so badly, they could choke on it. I'd spent years saving, investing, every spare cent, even some inheritance I swore I'd never touch. I liquidated everything, stocks, trust funds, the little cabin I'd rented out by the lake, $10 million in all. Enough to buy not just my land, but half the damn ridge. When the sale papers came through, I signed them under my own LLC Harrison Trust. Eldon thought they'd beaten me when the neighboring parcels went on the market. They didn't realize who was buying them. One by one, the ridge came back under my name. And then I did something that no one, least of all Eldon, saw coming. I called the county, I called the papers, I called the land conservancy out in Austin, and I gave it all away, every acre, free, protected, untouchable, forever. When the news hit, Eldon's men came storming back to my porch, their expensive shoes sinking in my dirt. "You can't do this," one of them shouted. "Do you realize what you've done?" I smiled then, yeah. I said I just made sure you never could. The wind picked up across the ridge carrying the smell of pine and ash. The same scent from that first day I got their letter. I looked out over the hills and thought of my father, of every fence post we'd set by hand. For the first time in years the land felt safe, but peace doesn't come easy, and Eldon Holdings wasn't done yet. They came back 2 weeks later, not with lawyers this time, but with a court order and a sheriff's deputy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The men from Eldon Holdings stood behind him smug as sin while the deputy handed me the folded papers. "Mr. Harrison," he said quietly, "there's been a motion filed to challenge your land transfer. Claims of impropriety during the acquisition." Impropriety? I scoffed. "I bought it fair, paid full price. Every cent clean." He shifted his hat. "Not my call, so court'll decide." I could see Robert Eldon watching from his black SUV window down just enough for me to catch his grin. He raised a hand like he was tipping an invisible hat, the arrogance of it burned hotter than the fire Tamban when they left Ruth Cambari and stopped Samuel, she said, trembling. "People like that don't lose gracefully." "I don't need them to lose gracefully," I said, "just permanently." She sat across from me, her eyes hard. "You could have sold and been done with it. 10 million, that's more than anyone around here seeing." A lifetime. I looked at the window where the field stretched golden into the horizon. I didn't buy this place to make money. I bought it to make sure they couldn't ruin it. Some things ain't for sale. Ruth, not the land, not memory, not peace. The weeks that followed felt like walking a minefield. Papers arrived almost daily. Subpoenas, claims, accusations that I'd laundered money, bribed officials, falsified documents, all of it nonsense. But nonsense for men with money can move mountains, and the county clerk who once brushed me off was now pale every time I came in one afternoon. I got a call from a woman named Evelyn Shaw, a land rights attorney out of Austin. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice calm but sharp. I saw the conservancy filing. "You made quite the splash." "Didn't mean to make one," I said, "just wanted to keep the land out of their hands." "Well, you did both, and I think I can help you keep it that way." She drove up 2 days later in a beat-up Jeep, all business, wearing boots that had seen more mud than some ranchers. We sat on the porch, coffee steaming between us as she flipped through her notes. "Eldon Holdings has a pattern," she said. "They push landowners buy up under threat, and if that doesn't work, they bury them in litigation. But you hit them where it hurts their reputation." I raised an eyebrow. Didn't know they had one. "They like to pretend," she said with a small smile. "You donating the land to a conservancy makes you a public darling. Any judge who rules against you now risks being seen as the man who sided with greed over conservation." I leaned back, exhaling. "So what you're saying is I might have a fighting chance." "More than that," she said. "I think we can win." And for a while it seemed she was right. We filed countersuits, requested hearings, dug up records showing Eldon Holdings had violated zoning laws in 3 other counties. Evelyn worked like a machine, burning through nights at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of folders and maps, but Eldon wasn't done playing dirty. It started with whispers, then a news article, then a dozen mysterious ranchers' shady land deal. 10 million in questionable funds used for conservation. Grab. Eldon CEO accuses Harrison of fraud. Lies, every one of them. Reporters showed up at my gate. Helicopters flew overhead. Neighbors started avoiding me in town, afraid my trouble might rub off on them. Even Ruth's visits grew less frequent. One evening, Evelyn tossed the latest newspaper onto the table. "They're trying to starve you out," she said. "Public pressure. They want you to fold." I looked at the headlines, at my name twisted into something unrecognizable. Let Them talk, I don't bend easy. She studied me for a moment. You sound like your father. Must have been. I smiled faintly. He taught me to fight with my hands first, my head second, and my heart last. But when it comes to land, he said you fight with all three. We worked through the storm, gathering evidence, meeting with journalists who still believed in truth. One night, Evelyn brought up something. Unexpected, Samuel. She said you could have just walked away. Bought yourself a ranch, somewhere quiet, lived easy. Why didn't you? I took a slow sip of coffee. Because they think money gives them the right to take whatever they want. I just wanted to remind them it doesn't. That night, thunder rolled across the ridge, and I couldn't sleep. I walked outside, the air thick with the smell of wet earth, and stood where the barn once stood. I thought about my father's words, asterisk, the land remembers who loves it. Asterisk, a few days later, the court hearing came. The room was packed, journalists, farmers, developers, locals who'd come to see if the man who gave away $10 million could really beat the giants. Eldon sat across from me, immaculate as ever. When our eyes met, he smiled. Faintly, like we were just two men in a game. The judge called for order, and the proceedings began. Evelyn argued with a calm ferocity, laying out every manipulation, every forged report, every intimidation tactic. Eldon's lawyers countered with polished lies. Hours passed, then days, and finally, the judge spoke. Mr. Harrison's actions were lawful. His acquisition of the land and its subsequent donation are upheld. The land remains under permanent conservation protection. Gasps filled the room. Evelyn's hand gripped my arm. Eldon's face didn't move at first, just froze, then cracked with something raw and furious. As I stepped outside, cameras flashed. People clapped. But I didn't feel like celebrating. I just felt tired, bone deep tired. That night, as I sat on the porch again, the ridge glowing under the moonlight, Evelyn came to stand beside me. You did it, she said softly. I shook my head. Asterisk, we asterisk did it. But this isn't over. Men like, Elle, she looked at me. Aina wed. Then you. I looked out over the land that had cost me everything and given me more. Whatever it takes to make sure they never try again. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the trees, I thought I saw headlights watching, just sitting still, waiting. The headlights stayed there for almost an hour. 2 bright points in the black tree line, unmoving. Then they flicked off, and the night swallowed them whole. I didn't sleep that night. The house creaked like it always had, old, wood shifting with the wind, but every sound felt amplified, like the land itself was holding its breath. By dawn, I'd made coffee strong enough to peel paint and stood by the window, watching the mist creep over the fields. The stillness should have been comforting. It wasn't. When Evelyn arrived later that morning, she saw the circles under my eyes and frowned. You look like you didn't close your eyes. Didn't feel right to, I said. Someone was out there last night. Her eyebrows arched. You sure? As sure as I've ever been about anything, she sighed, setting her bag on the table. They're angry, Samuel. Publicly humiliated, legally cornered, financially bleeding. You beat them fair, and they can't stand it, but they can still make trouble. I nodded. Let them try. But trouble didn't come as I expected, not through threats or fire or headlines. It came through whispers and smiles. First, the local bank froze my accounts. Routine audit, they said. Then the electric company accidentally disconnected my power for 2 days. My track fried stretch eventu giri renewed 4. Little things, small cuts, but enough of them start to bleed. When Ruth came by that afternoon, her eyes were red. Samuel, te came for me, she said, trembling. Some man from the city said my water rights are under review. They're trying to scare me into selling. My fist clenched. They're still playing the same damn game, she nodded. And they're dragging the whole town into it. That was the breaking point. I wasn't just fighting for my land anymore, I was fighting for everyone who didn't have $10 million to stand between them and the wolves. I started calling meetings in the old Grange hall down by the crossroads. Farmers, ranchers, and families filled the benches, faces lined with fatigue and anger. The first meeting was quiet, uncertain. The second, louder. By the third, the walls trembled with determination. Where Donald? Need to wait for some of them to say front. Where do what we've ever done, we stand together. We build our own fund, our own defense, our own voice. A young man barely 20, his hands still raw, from baling hay, stood up. You think that'll stop them? They've got lawyers, lobbyists, politicians. Yeah, I said, and we've got something they never will, Roots. The room erupted in agreement. For the first time in months, I saw hope flicker behind tired eyes. Evelyn helped us file paperwork for a cooperative or collective ownership fund for rural land preservation. Every member would own a share. Every acre would be protected. It wasn't flashy, but it was strong. News spread fast. How we done week prename overs. People who'd never met me, never even seen the ridge sent letters and checks. They'd read about what happened and wanted to help. The story of the man who refused to sell had become something bigger than me, but just as hope grew, Eldon struck again. Late one evening, as the sun bled over the horizon, Evelyn got a call. Première watershed. Her face pale as she listened, the receiver trembling slightly in her hand. What is it? I asked. They're filing a federal injunction, she said, claiming the Conservancy Partnership violates trade regulations. They're saying the donation was part of a coordinated effort to restrict development. They're bringing Washington into it now. I laughed, sharp and humorless. Of course they are. When they can't win fair, they change the rules. Evelyn met my gaze, steel in her voice. Then we'll change the game. That night, we worked under the dim glow of the kitchen light. Maps, files, and letters littered the table. I pulled out my father's old ledgers, pages yellowed, but meticulous. Every sale, every acre, every transaction recorded. If they want to question ownership, let's show them how deep this goes. I said, this land's been in our name since 1894. We've got receipts older than there. Company. Sometime after midnight, Evelyn leaned back, rubbing her temples. You know, Samuel, she said softly, you could have been a lawyer. Or a general. I smiled faintly. My father said I was too stubborn to be either. She chuckled, then her eyes softened. He'd be proud. You know, I didn't answer. Right away. My gaze drifted to the wind of the moon, hanging low, the field silver and quiet. I hope so, I said finally. I hope he'd think I did right by the land. The injunction hearing was set for late spring in Dallas. Big courtroom. Federal judges, cameras. Eldon Holdings came in full force, dozens of lawyers, suits pressed to perfection. Their arrogance radiating off them like heat. When we walked in, the reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. Mr. Harrison, did you use offshore accounts to fund the purchase? Was this a political statement? Do you regret giving away the land? I stopped, turned, and said, the only thing I regret is that men like them think owning dirt makes them gods. The room erupted. In flashes, inside, the hearing stretched for hours. Eldon's side argued that my donation created an unfair economic disadvantage, that I'd sabotaged development opportunities crucial to the region's growth. Evelyn countered. Fiers à suffire, laying bare they'd spun. When the session adjourned for recess, Eldon approached me in the hallway. You've made quite a mess. Mr. Harrison, he said, voice low. You really think people care about your little act of charity? They'll forget you by next spring. I stepped closer, meeting his gaze without blinking. Maybe, but you'll remember me every time you look at that ridge and know it's something you'll never own. He smirked. Everyone has their season. Harrison, yours is ending. He walked away, the click of his shoes echoing down the marble hall. As I watched him go, a cold realization settled over me. He wasn't just talking about the case. He meant something else, something coming. When we returned home a few days later, the air felt wrong still, heavy. The ridge was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds seemed to have gone silent. And as I rounded the bend, near the creek, I saw it, a column of black smoke. Rising from the far field, the fire had started again. Only this time, it wasn't an accident. The fire wasn't wild, it was precise, controlled in its destruction. The fence line was gone, the soil scorched, the heart of my father's land torn open again. The air was thick with the smell of burning cedar and diesel. Whoever had done it had known what they were doing. They'd wanted me to see it. I jumped out of the truck before it even stopped rolling. The heat hit my face, dry and punishing, as flames licked at the last standing posts. I grabbed the hose from the pump, turned the valve, and doused what I could. The ground hissed, smoke curling around me like ghosts. Bytmast. Of it was gone, already the backfield, where the creek bent through the cottonwoods. My father used to take me there to fish when I was a kid. By the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing left but smoldering ash. Ruth showed up soon after, breathless and pale. Samuel, my God, what happened? I shook my head, coughing through the smoke. Same people who burned the barn, I reckon. Same people who don't like losing. She covered her mouth, tears streaking her cheeks. You've got to go to the sheriff. I already did once, I said, my voice gravel. He called it an accident. Evelyn arrived minutes later, slamming her Jeep door hard enough to make the firefighters look up. Jesus, Samuel, she said, rushing to my side. You okay? I'm fine, I said. Land's not. She stared out over the charred stretch, jaw tightening. They're escalating. We need to document this. Photos, reports, everything. I know who did it, I muttered. Knowing and proving are different things, she said, snapping pictures with her phone. The next morning, we found the sign. Someone had staked it right by the main gate. A clean white placard with black block letters. Should have sold. The words hit harder than any fire. Evelyn ripped it from the ground and hurled it into the ditch, cursing under her breath. This is intimidation, plain and simple. Yeah, I said quietly. And it's working on everyone but me, because that was the truth. The town had gone quiet. Again, people who once came to meetings now crossed the street when they saw me. The local paper stopped covering our story. The cooperative's donations slowed. Fear spreads fast and small, towns faster than gossip. 2 nights later, Ruth called me in tears. They came to my place. She whispered to men. Safe from you didn't sell, they'd me. I called the sheriff. He said there was nothing he could do. Pack a bag, I told her. You're staying here tonight. When she arrived, shaken but unharmed, Evelyn was already at the kitchen table with her laptop open. We're going to expose this, she said. All of it. The threats, the fires, the corruption. How? I asked. Public records, she said. Follow the money. ILL find the contracts tying Eldon Holdings to the county officials who signed off on the zoning deals. Once it's public, they'll have nowhere to hide. I watched her type for hours, her face lit by the cold glow of the screen. Midnight turned to dawn. The air outside was still, the kind that comes before a storm. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wide. Samuel, you need to see this. On her screen was a list of payments large, recurring, routed through shell corporations. The recipients, county commissioners, state inspectors, even a deputy from the sheriff's office, all tied to Eldon Holdings. God almighty, I breathed. They bought the whole damn town. Evelyn nodded grimly. And they used a front company to hide it, an LLC registered out of Houston. The same one that filed the fire insurance claim for your barn. That was it, the proof we needed. We called a press conference in Austin. The Conservancy backed us, environmental groups lined up behind our cause, and for the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we could bury Eldon for good. But the morning of the conference, Evelyn didn't show up. I called her phone, no answer. Called again, nothing. Drove the entire way down the ridge, through town, past the post office and diner. Her Jeep was nowhere to be seen. When I reached the highway turnoff toward Austin, I saw it. Skid, marks veering off the shoulder. Broken guardrail. And below, in the ravine, metal twisted and glinting in the sunlight, her Jeep, the sheriff's deputies were already there. One of them, the same man who'd brushed off my complaints months before, stepped toward me. Mr. Harrison, he said carefully, looks like she lost control. Bad weather. Slick road. I stared at him. It didn't rain last night. He shifted uncomfortably. We'll know more after the report. Like hell you will. I snapped. I'm not leaving until I see for myself. He blocked my path. Sir, I can't let you down there. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You work for them, don't you? He didn't answer. Didn't have to. I drove home in silence that night. Ruth tried to speak, but I couldn't. I sat on the porch until sunrise, the ridge glowing, faint gold again, pretending the world hadn't just tipped sideways. Then, as I stood to go inside, I saw something nailed to the front door, another white sign. Asterisk, asterisk, last warning. Asterisk, asterisk, I ripped it down, my hand shaking. Somewhere deep, inside, the part of me that still believed in law and order cracked. They'd taken enough my barn, my peace, my friend. Das Martin bar bevor bench. Inside was his Winchester rifle, the same one we'd used for coyotes and deer back when I was a boy. I lifted it out, the wood still smelling faintly of oil and dust. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about justice. I was thinking about payback. And I knew exactly where to start. I stood on the porch with the rifle, across my knees, and felt the weight of it more in my chest than in my hands. It wasn't tea that I hadn't meant. What I said payback tasted like iron-on, my tongue but the moment my thumb brushed the wood. A memory slid up from somewhere deep and stopped me, my father teaching me to aim. Telling me the bullet is a last thing, not a first. He'd taught me to use my head before my hands, and I realized then that taking a life, or starting one, would hand them the victory they wanted, the one where fear breaks people into silence. I wanted them to be broken, yes, but not in the way they expected. I set the rifle back into the safe and locked it. The metal clicked like a hinge in the night. We don't fight their way. I told Ruth and the few who stayed Evelyn's absence still a raw. Smearan, they watched me, faces lit by the yellow kitchen light. We exposed them. We ruined them, the only clean way left, by showing what they are. Ruth's knuckles white on her coffee mug. How? They own the paper. They own the sheriff. They own half the courthouse. Her voice was small, but it hit something in me like a bell. We have what they don't, I said. Proof, and we have people who care. That counts for a hell of a lot. I handed Ruth a folder Evelyn had given me before. She disappeared copies of the shell payments, the LLC filings, the insurance claims. We give this to someone who still remembers how to write the truth. We needed a name with reach and teeth, not the local paper that had gone quiet. I thought the report reads ago a freelance investigator, Mara Delgado, who'd chased environmental stories from Texas deserts to Appalachian ridgelines. I called her with the kind of voice you use when you're reoffering a story that might change a career. She came, of course. She drove up with a camera over her shoulder and a look like she'd smelled a live story. You really went and bought the whole hill, she said when she saw the burned stubble and the still raw earth. She didn't talk much, which was good. She listened, and when I opened the folders, she read through the chain of transactions like a prospector reading veins in rock. This is more than a local scam, she said slowly. This is fraud, bribery, and if those fires tie back arson. And those payments? That's a money laundering trail that'll lead straight to someone who likes playing king. Can you publish? Ruth whispered behind me. Mara looked at me, something fierce in her eyes. I can, but they'll come after you harder. You ready for that? Her question was, a blade, truth or safety? I thought of Evelyn on that guardrail and the white placard in Ruth's ditch. I thought of the kids in town, of the co-op's quiet donors, of the way my father's hands had smelled of cedar and work. I'm ready, I said. We didn't announce it like a battle plan. We handed the documents over and let her work. Mara called people she trusted, an editor with a conscience at a national outlet, a state investigator who used to work the anti-corruption beat and hadn't yet been bought, a lawyer at the Attorney General's office who'd prosecuted property fraud before. Within 48 hours, the atmosphere changed. Vehicles with government plates started appearing at the county building, plain clothes people moving through the sheriff's office like ghosts. Reporters descended in a different way, quiet, formal. Not the camp followers, but the ones who know the law and the risks and how to hold a camera steady when the air tastes like ash. Eldon's men noticed. They came to my gate one dawn, voices low and unpleasant. Mr. Harrison, you've stirred up. A hornet's nest you can't control, one said. The tone was the same as before, but this time there was a hint of fear under the braggadocio. They had lawyers and money, but the faces of some of them flickered when they saw the license plate state investigators. And they left without much more than threats that sounded thin in the morning air. The first public piece dropped a week later. A long-form investigation with timestamps and bank records and photographs taken in the very night. Evelyn's Jeep lay twisted in the ravine. Mara's byline sat like a weapon across the top of the page. The piece didn't scream. It didn't need to. It laid facts down, like knives payments routed through shell companies, matching transaction dates with zoning meetings, an insurance payout chain that read like a map. It exploded. Calls flooded the Attorney General's office. People who'd been quiet for months found their voices again and called in. One by one, farmers, county clerks, even a deputy who'd left a voicemail that admitted things in a state of panic. Investigators who'd been watching from the edges stepped forward with subpoenas. The local bank that had frozen. My accounts had to answer questions about the audits it had performed. Insurance companies reopened files. The sheriff, who'd once been indifferent, found his office in upheaval as federal. Agents came through the door asking to see logs and radio transmissions. They wanted answers. So did Eldon. He sat across from a camera with a practiced smile and told the world he'd been a pillar of development and a victim of a smear campaign. That same week, federal charges were quietly filed. Conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and obstruction of justice. The indictment included the shell companies and, slowly, the names of local officials who'd taken payments. The deputy who had brushed me off was suspended pending investigation. He tried to deny everything, but his signatures were on bank receipts. I didn't watch the indictments like a man licking wounds. I watched like someone watching a train that had finally been set on the right track. It took time. Court dates, filings, lawyers with combed hair trying to make mountains of evidence look like molehills. El Denos? Empire didn't collapse overnight, but the fractures showed. Investors pulled back. Boards asked questions, and his public projects were frozen under federal injunctions. For a company built on appearances and influence, that was all it took. There were reprisals, of course. More fire smaller, picked at the borders of the cooperatively owned lots there, intent to send a message, not to destroy. Someone smashed the windows at the Grange Hall. Anonymous threats lit up Evelyn's inbox until she went dark on purpose. She'd called me once from a hospital room where blood bandaged her temple, voice hoarse but sharp. They tried to get to me on the highway, she whispered. Someone forced my wheel. I'm okay. I'm alive, she told me then. Voice trembling. That she'd gone in for scans and surgery and that the federal team had slipped her into a witness protection program for a while. I wanted to be with her, to drag her down the dirt road and put her coffee mug into her hands, but she asked for distance one, more precaution. Do the work, she said. Make it stick. We made it stick. The AG's office built a case knot. On smoke and rumour, but on contracts and wire, transfers. On witness testimony from the county clerk who'd lied on paper but cried on. A witness, 11 deputière incurred a shelled voicemail index forms. The federal prosecutor called it the biggest land corruption case in the state's recent memory. The courtroom was packed the day indictments were read. Eldon watched with the same cool smile that never reached his eyes. You did something I thought impossible, Mara told me quietly, standing by the courthouse steps. After a long day in the sun. You took 10 million and turned it into a public shield. That's not charity. That's strategy. She smiled, tired and a little thrilled. Your father would have liked that. I thought of him as crooked laugh. The way he'd stop on a fence post to point out a hawk hand, let the praise roll over me like a cool hand. He would have thought I was stubborn, I said. And not in a good way. Justice is messy and slow. Eldon fought every inch appeals, motions, spin doctors. He hired more lawyers than the state had prosecutors, and his money sent out a fog of obfuscation. But money can't buy everything. It couldn't buy away the electronic paper trail. It couldn't buy silence from a clerk who suddenly feared jail time more than losing a paycheck. It couldn't buy the conscience of a man who'd been on the fence and chose to testify. When the jury returned, the moment stretched out like the ridge at dawn, endless, light piling up inch by inch. The foreman read the verdict slowly, guilty on multiple counts. Eldon's face changed then in a way I'd never seen, no smirk, just the collapse of certainty, into something smaller. Ewen Duntos. The county jail in cuffs, a scene that looked unreal, because we'd watched him from offices and billboards and country club luncheons. Seeing him led away felt like watching a dam crack. The cost, though, was heavy. The fires left scars. Trees that had stood with my father's name in rings were gone, and some places on the ridge would never look the same. Ruth's hair went grey in a way that made her look older than the years. Evelyn's recovery was a quiet war days in a hospital and nights full of nightmares. The cooperative lost. Donations during the scariest months, and some members sold out of fear. Others held firm, their ownership, shares stitched into legal documents that stubbornly protected the land. We repaired fences with hands raw and burned, and the community rebuilt the barns that fire had taken. One evening, long after the trials and the headlines, I walked the boundary line at dusk with Brody, my dog, padding alongside. The ridge breathed with wind. The grass waved like an old friend greeting me. The scars from the fire still showed black ribs of trunks and a hollow where the creek had been scorched, but the creosote smell had thinned, replaced by new shoots pushing through ash. You did good, Ruth said from the porch, voice carrying across the field. Première looked. Back at the house sits porch light warm against the blue and at the conserved land beyond, now legally bound like a promise. We did. I corrected. All of us. There was no choir, no heroes parade. There was dirty work, court filings, nights awake listening for headlights. And small kindnesses handed over kitchen tables, a casserole left at the door, bandages for burned hands, a lawyer who didn't bill for every hour. That, too, felt like victory. The ridge belonged to the future now children who might someday fish where my father had. Families who'd walk its trails, birds that would find a rest. I often went up to the far field where the creek made its lazy bend and sat on the charred stump of the oldest cedar, thinking about what it had taken. I kept the rifle in the safe and only took it down once, years later, when a copper pipe froze in a storm and I used it to swing a makeshift lever to free a frozen pump. The things I'd once considered tools of last resort had become symbols of restraint. Sometimes, at night, I still saw headlights sitting quiet beyond the trees. Sometimes, a shadow moved through the edge of vision and my hands tightened on the porch rail. Habits. Sleeping weight of dread wasn't the same. Those nights, I breathed deep and felt the land beneath my boots firm, stubborn, unpurchasable. I had spent 10 million to buy it, but what I had spent more of was something you can't count. Time. Patience. Friends. A willingness to be broken and put back together piece by piece. Not a day goes by that I don't think of Evelyn her grin when we won, her voice on that hospital line telling me to keep the story alive. The state kept her safe. She writes sometimes, a postcard sent in a hand that doesn't reveal where she is. Keep the coffee hot, one said, and I kept it hot, and we all kept going. If there's a lesson in all of it, it's that land remembers. It remembers who loved it, who fought for it, who gave it away to make sure it lived. Money buys a lot of things, but it can't buy roots. It can't buy stubbornness that's been in your blood for generations. It can't replace the sound of a creek or the laugh of a neighbor at supper. So when the wind comes over the ridge now and takes the old smell of smoke and cedar and mixes them into something new, I stand and listen. I picture my father on that porch, perhaps grinning at whatever stubborn thing he saw in me, and I think about the sign in Ruth's ditch that said, simply, once, asterisk, should have sold, asterisk, I walk past that ditch now, and the sign is gone. In its place, someone no note, no fanfare had planted a sapling. It's small, a green stick against the big sky, but it leans toward the light. Premier Pumi. Hand on it one afternoon, and felt the pulse of life beneath the bark, sure as a heartbeat. That sapling grew fast. By the second, spring its leaves were the color of new copper, trembling whenever the wind rolled down from the ridge. I'd walk there most mornings with my coffee, boots sinking into the soft earth, and watch the sunrise pour gold over the valley. The Landsteed Shedbuck. Together, scarred but alive. The creek had found its voice again, whispering through reeds that had taken root in the ashes. It was quiet, almost too quiet, until one morning the phone rang. The number was blocked. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the receiver, then picked it up. Monsieur a raison. Ah. Familiar voice said, smooth, come to calm. I suppose congratulations are in order. My stomach went cold. Eldon, he laughed softly. Ah, so you do remember me. I remember you in cuffs, I said. He sighed, as if amused. Temporary. You should know better than anyone money doesn't disappear. It just moves. I stepped out onto the porch, watching the fog curl across the ridge. You're calling to threaten me. Don't bother. You've already lost. Lost, he repeated, savoring the word. Mr. Harrison, losing implies the game is over. But games like ours never end, they evolve. You took my land. I took the lesson. I learned that ownership isn't about paper, it's about influence. He paused, letting the silence sit heavy between us. Enjoy your ridge, Samuel. The rest of the county will be mine soon enough. The line clicked dead. I stood there for a long time, the hum of the dial tone fading into the wind. The man was supposed to be ruined, his company dissolved, his accounts frozen, his allies indicted. But men like Eldon were weeds. They grew back through cracks you didn't know existed. That evening, I drove into town. The streets were quieter. Now half the shops closed, the rest holding on by grit. Ruth's place had become a small community centre where the co-op held its meetings. She was there, setting out folding chairs, her grey hair pulled back in a loose braid. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said when she saw me. Close enough, I said, sitting down heavily. He called. Her eyes darkened. Eldon. Yeah, said he's coming back, different name, different front. She slammed a hand on the table. After everything, after all that, I nodded slowly. He's got money buried somewhere. And friends who owe him favors. She sat across from me, silent for a long time. 10 schusse, then wheelkite, filled the hall, again familiar. Faces, tired but resolute. People who had seen what corruption could do and what standing together could fix. I told them what I'd heard. And the room buzzed with anger, fear, determination. One man, Tom, a rancher who'd lost half his herd to the first fire, stood and said, "We can't fight ghosts, Samuel. We need to get ahead of him. Build something he can't buy his way into." He was right. Over the next months, we did just that. The cooperative expanded into a land trust network across counties, pooling resources. Locking down acres under conservation, titles that no developer could touch. We brought in lawyers, planners, even teachers who started programs to educate kids on land rights and stewardship. The Reg more than a refugiatoire said. But for every acre we saved, Eldon found another corner to poison. His new kind is in Greywater Blatland on. The far side of the highway, where oversight was weaker, people were selling again, desperate after drought and debt. I drove down there one afternoon to see for myself. Where there had once been ranches, there were bulldozers. Trees flattened, earth churned into raw clay. Signs read future, site of Greywater, estates luxury, living in the hill country. The air smelled wrong chemical. Artificial, the scent of something that didn't belong. As I turned to leave, a truck pulled up beside me. A man climbed out mid-30s, sharp suit, expensive watch. He smiled like a politician. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "a pleasure. My name's Victor. I represent Greywater Holdings." "I bet you do," I said. "Who's behind?" Bothering, he grinned wieder. "A group of investors, of course. Visionaries, men who understand progress. Progress doesn't look like this," I said. Gesturing at the torn-up hillside, he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You can't stop it, you know. People want homes. They want comfort. You think sentiment can compete with profit?" I looked him dead in the eye. "No, but history can." He chuckled. "You sound just like him." "Like who?" He hesitated just long enough to tell me I was right. "Enjoy your nostalgia, Mr. Harrison," he said finally, climbing back into the truck. "The future's already written." He drove off, dust billowing in his wake. I stood there long after. He disappeared, the wind tugging at my jacket. The land went just some more field real. Every generation had to fight for it in new ways. That night, I called Evelyn. It had been months since we'd spoken. When her voice came on the line, I felt something like relief and guilt twist together. "I heard about Greywater," she said before I could even speak. "Eldon's fingerprints are all over it. Same shell structures, same offshore accounts. I figured as much. He's using proxies this time," she continued. "No paper trail. He's learned from you. That's what scares me." I admitted. "He's not trying to steal anymore. He's trying to rewrite the rules." She went quiet for a moment, then said, "Then we'll rewrite them first, over the next weeks." Evelyn and I worked like we had in the old days, me in the field, her behind the screen. We gathered evidence, tracked ownership transfers, pulled estate filings until our eyes burned. Every new document felt like peeling away another layer of deceit. En de ten. We found it buried deep in a holding company based out of the Caymans. The principal investor in Greywater was listed under a pseudonym, *E, Harrow, *. I laughed when I saw it. He didn't even bother to hide the initials. Evelyn smiled through the phone. Arrogance always leaves fingerprints. We sent the file to Mora, who was still writing, for the national outlet. Je promised to publish, but only once she had enough to make it stick. In the meantime, the bulldozers moved closer. They'd broken ground less than a mile from the old creek bed. Ruth called me one morning in tears. They're poisoning the water table, she said. The fish are dying. That was the last straw. We went public again, but this time, it wasn't me leading the charge. It were the next generation, the kids who'd grown up watching us fight. They organized rallies, posted drone footage, started petitions that spread like wildfire. Witandai. #SaveTheRidge was trending nationwide. Donations flooded back in. The governor's office called. Greywater's permits were suspended pending investigation. When the news broke, I stood by the creek, watching the sun shimmer on the water. The ridge was quiet again. Ruth came up beside me, her eyes soft. Think it's over? She asked. I shook my head. Not over. Just another round. Finished. She smiled faintly. You ever get tired of fighting? I looked à livre, défiant, éternel. Every day, I said. And every day I wake up ready to do it again, because that's the thing about land, it doesn't belong to you. You belong to it. And as long as I drew breath, no man, no company, no empire of greed would ever own what my father taught me to love. Summer came late that year, slow and heavy. The rains held back, leaving the ridge brittle and gold under a relentless sun. The air shimmered with heat, and every step on the earth kicked up the smell of dust and cedar oil. I'd sit most mornings on the porch with a mug of coffee that never stayed hot long enough, listening to the creak of cicadas, thinking about everything we'd managed to keep standing and everything that still threatened to fall. The papers were quieter now. The scandal had burned bright and fast and then, like all things in the news cycle, gone dim. Greywater's operations were under review, the official phrase that meant nothing and everything. Eldon himself had disappeared again, somewhere overseas. His name whispered in boardrooms, but never printed anymore. He was like a rumor that refused to die. Ruth said I should take that as a victory. I wasn't sure I could. One afternoon, while fixing the fence near the old cedar stump, I heard tires crunching on gravel. A white pickup truck rolled up the road, engine grumbling low. The driver stepped out lean, sunburned, a baseball cap shading his eyes. He looked too young to be carrying the kind of tension he wore on his face. Mr. Harrison? He asked. Depends who's asking, I said. He smiled awkwardly and pulled a folded letter from his jacket. Name's Ben Eldon. I think you knew my father. For a second, all sound seemed to drain from the air, the wind, the insects, everything. Emustovev. Seen the way I stiffened because he raised a hand. Quickly, I'm not here for trouble. Sir, I'm not him really looked. He had the same jawline, the same sharpness in his eyes, but something softer lived there too, something uncertain. What do you want? I asked. He held out the letter. He left this for you. Told me to deliver it if things ever went bad for him. I hesitated, then took it. The envelope was unmarked, sealed with wax. The paper inside smelled faintly of smoke and cologne. Asterisk Samuel, asterisk, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Don't waste time celebrating. I'm not writing for forgiveness or sympathy. I've come to understand something too late. You were right. I never wanted the land. I wanted control. I thought owning it made me powerful. Sur note. You can own the world and still die hollow. Asterisk, my son doesn't deserve my shadow. He doesn't even know what I took from this place or from people like you. If he's standing in front of you now, it means he's trying to do better. Don't turn him away. The land needs stewards, not owners. That was your word, not mine. But I think I finally understand it. Asterisk, Eldon asterisk I. Had it twice, then fonvelope. He really give this to you? I asked. Ben nodded. He mailed it to me 2 weeks before he disappeared. I didn't even know who you were until I started reading about the ridge. You're working for him. No, he said quickly. That's the thing. I quit Greywater. What they're doing it isn't right. They're draining the groundwater, building on unstable clay. People are going to get hurt, so why come to me? Because you're the only one who ever stopped him, he said. And because I think you're the only one who knows how. There was something in his voice, Ernest. Desperate, that reminded me of myself before all the scars and loss. All right, I said finally. You better come inside. We talked for hours, sitting at the kitchen table, where Evelyn and I had once mapped out the fight against his father. Ben told me about Greywater's new project, a planned ecoriza tea along the South Ridge, the same ridge that bordered protected land. They were falsifying environmental impact reports, bribing inspectors again. The old game, new mask. He showed me documents, emails.